I remember I did a large complicated command, and then I realized I had to type the entire same thing again for a different system. Automation is key because it helps us focus on things that matter. We have limited human attention, and it helps us really focus on what makes sense.
What did running a production teach you about risk and most security leaders miss?
The business doesn't care about security. The business cares about the business.
Terry O'Daniel doesn't slow companies down. He secures their rise. From Netflix to Instacart, his security leadership transforms risk into momentum, trust, and scalable growth.
The more you can automate large sets of data and get better, more actionable results from them, the more you're doing yourself a service.
When founders come to you, what do they most often get wrong about building products that actually earns customers' trust?
The fastest way to lose trust is trying to automate what you don't fully understand.
Welcome to Automate or Die Trying, the show where moving fast and staying secure isn't a contradiction, it's a job. I'm your host, Will Ramos. Today I'm joined by Terry O'Daniel. Terry currently is CISO at Scribe Security, focused on end-to-end security, supply chain security. Before that, he led security at Amplitude and Instacart and built programs at Netflix and Salesforce. He started engineering, which shapes how he thinks about security, not as a blocker, but as an enabler of velocity. Terry, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Will. Appreciate you having me, and it's really exciting to talk about automation, one of my favorite subjects.
Awesome. So for folks listening, give me a quick picture. What does your world look like right now at Scribe, and what scale are you operating at?
Yeah, at the moment, I'm doing fractional work for both Scribe Security and also Udia, which is a legal AI assistant tool that helps large corporate legal departments help do the work faster and more precisely. So my work these days is very much about helping clients in the startup and scale up space understand where and how they need to invest in security and how to align those goals with the production pipeline, how to really build DevSecOps as a practice so that we can automate away some of the boring stuff and really focus on where security can have the biggest impact.
Awesome. Now, in your profile, you mentioned that you focus on a couple of things, right? Like a CTEM, vulnerability management, and customer trust, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to dig into all that. But first, let's rewind a little bit. You started engineering, built your way into security leadership. Walk us through that transition. What pulled you from building systems to defending them?
It's interesting. I remember one of my first roles where I started out as a network engineer, and then I worked heavily as a network and systems administrator and architect. And I remember in one of my early roles at a startup, I really cut my teeth in roles at startups here in the Silicon Valley. I remember I did a large complicated command, and then I realized I had to type the entire same thing again for a different system.
Yep.
And it struck me that this is pretty boring, and this is not how I want to spend my day. So I think one of the earliest things I realized as a builder, as an engineer who was getting systems up, getting data centers up, getting networks configured correctly, is the fun part of the job is really the accountability. The fun part is understanding what is the business goal, how do I get there, and how do I deliver good results. The hands-on typing out every individual character of a command didn't interest me so much. And I think that's one of the first areas where I realized automation is key because it helps us focus on things that matter. We have limited human attention, and it helps us really focus on what makes sense. And I think that aligns really well with my journey to security. I remember I was at Yahoo. I was a director of production engineering at Yahoo, and my SVP asked me to take on a project which was really dealing with some boring compliance stuff that the engineering organization really didn't care about, but they were accountable to deliver. And I realized quickly two things. One, not understanding where this request came from, why it was important to the business, what was the risk if it went wrong to the business. Um, it made it boring. It made it drudgery. And the second thing I realized is if we actually invested in that left side of the equation, why are we doing this? Why should we care? What's can actually happen to the business if it goes right or wrong? That's where the fun stuff is. That's where we can get people interested in, and to care about it. And that's where I started to realize the more we treat these as different disciplines, the less we try to align them together, the less successful we're likely to be. So that's really where I started my journey towards thinking of myself as more of a risk professional and eventually a security professional rather than a pure building infrastructure engineer.
Yeah, you mentioned Yahoo, right? I think that you spent like 5 years in there for production engineering, right? So
Yeah.
before moving into security leadership, what did running a production teach you about risk and most security leaders miss?
I think if to begin, it taught me a great deal of empathy. I was on the receiving end of um, seemingly random and haphazard requests from security to do certain things. Fix this, patch this, resolve this vulnerability. We need this evidence to show the auditors, what have you. And again, by not understanding the risks, by not having the full end-to-end picture of why is this important, what are the boundaries of what works and what doesn't, that's where I started to realize we can do great work in engineering, but what if we're focused on the wrong thing? What if we don't really understand, what are the outcomes here that we're trying to achieve? So that's where I started, I think, to think about why risk is important. And risk, I think, really comes down to resource allocation. We have limited human hours, we have limited resources, be it money or systems or what have you, and we have to decide how to make the best use of them. In engineering, especially production engineering, we're very focused on operational efficiency. We want to make sure that we can, spin up and down VMs, containers, things like that as efficiently as possible with as little manual intervention as possible. But that's also a risk decision. If I don't have to manually configure something, the chances of me fat fingering it or not understanding the boundaries of the network or something like that goes way down. The more we can shift those conversations to the left so we can have them once with the right people in the room and get a full picture of the equation, then we can use that risk mindset to understand where do we automate, where do we spend our time, and how do we focus on what the business actually wants.
You're talking my language there, Terry. So looking at your path, Finisar, Yahoo, Salesforce, Netflix, Instacart, Amplitude, now Scribe. Was there a specific project or even a failure along the way that fundamentally changed how you think about balancing speed and security?
Interesting. I think a lot of it comes down to resource constraints. I think, again, sometimes the business outcomes go through several layers of translation. And so when you're an engineer, you may get this random request that says, go here, do this thing. And if you're lucky, maybe there's some test cases that have been written so you understand what the definition of done is, and you understand the dependencies, so you know the definition of ready. But that's usually kind of it. At the point where you're an engineer, hands on keyboard doing the work, you're abstracted from the layers of why are we doing this work? So certainly, all the way back to Yahoo, there were times where we were told to do something and we did it, but maybe it was originated not from a technical challenge, but there was a revenue recognition risk that finance has, and they needed us to implement something. Well, being close to the data, but not having that level of end-to-end understanding of why are we doing this? Why are we focused on it? That really showed me that if we don't organize ourselves into guardrails of what the boundaries of acceptable behavior are, then we're missing the opportunity to kind of, build a groove into, like putting a groove in a record or something like that.
Right.
Once you put those grooves in place, it's easy. You can rely on inertia to some extent to continue that pattern. But if you don't have that pattern, you don't have that sense of, and I'll take a specific example from Yahoo. We had this thing called the operational readiness checklist. When you're in ops, one of the worst things that can happen is dev comes along, throws something over the wall, and says, "Here you go, put this live."
Yeah.
And now, and I think the worm has turned, and now we're in the case of sort of the reverse case where everything is the responsibility of those individual dev teams in the world of DevOps. And I'm not sure that's working either, but we can get into that. But I think a few times where, what does operational readiness look like? What does it look like to be ready to put a product live into production? Turning that from a checklist and meetings into a risk-based understanding with a baseline and boundaries of what the good enough behavior is, that helps us be efficient. It takes the boring work away, and it really helps us focus on building that operational efficiency that's so important in infrastructure.
Now, you mentioned a couple things that are true to my heart, right? I was just speaking to a previous guest by the name of Josh Copeland, and he mentioned compliance should be the baseline, not the standard, because, security by design should be what you should really focus on, right? So do you see that? Like, why do you think most organizations miss that? Like they feel like it's checkbox compliance. They think it's good, but in reality, it really isn't, right? It's a process of security.
Moving from larger companies to smaller organizations, startups and scale-ups, and early public companies that I've worked in recently, has taught me a lot about the fact that the business doesn't care about security. The business cares about the business. And our job in security is to establish the threshold of what we can get away with, to use game theory a little bit. Compliance is interesting because compliance is very much about not doing your best work. Compliance is about understanding the very narrow band of what success looks like and building systems so that you can hit that narrow band every single time. And I think there's two underlying factors that make this challenging. One, we have for so long treated compliance as an afterthought, not very sexy or cool, not something real engineers work on. And I think by doing that, we do ourselves a disservice, because that is what the business cares about. No one cares if I build the best application security program in the world. What they care about is, how can I get better business outcomes from that resource investment? If I'm putting money towards something, I have to have the end in sight. I can't build, coming from a builder mindset, I can't just sort of take the agile approach of, I'm going to do this little thing and I'm going to get feedback and iterate. You really have to start with the end in mind. What we need to do is we need to stay compliant. We need our SOC 2 to sell. We need to be PCI compliant. We need to be GDPR compliant to sell in these markets. If I understand what the narrow band of success looks like, and I automate the bejesus out of these systems, and I take that more operational mindset, then I think you get two things. Success does become a baseline. And secondly, you can start to measure these things less as projects to be achieved, or a burn down chart of controls that I need to successfully complete, but rather it's an operational baseline. We are compliant. Every control is working. We monitor them. If something isn't working, we get alerted, and we have a standing SLA that we will get those back to green within 7 days. That's how we treat operational, keep the lights on type work in engineering. And I think if we don't pull that mindset into compliance, then you have the chance of missing the mark, and the business is really going to be upset if suddenly it turns out, oh, we can't sell in that market, or we don't have that certification.
Right, right. Let's talk CTEM. And for folks that don't know what CTEM stands for, is Continuous Threat Exposure Management. It's becoming a buzzword now, right? But
Yeah.
it looks like you're actually implementing and actually doing it. So what does continuous threat exposure management look like in practice? So not the Gartner definition, right? But it's actual operational reality, right? What does that look like?
I think some of it comes back to your last question about compliance. For so long, we've done, every company out there does a pen test annually. Great, great. And that's helpful and it's useful. I'm sure everyone gets some findings from it and they resolve those and they get a clean pen test or a good enough one and they share it with their customers and then everyone forgets about it for a year.
Yeah,
And that's where I think treating compliance as an afterthought, not understanding that it's a core part of the business, if you can shift that mindset, and I think that was always the promise of CTEM, and we just didn't have the technology to get there. Um, if you really want to, there's a there's a horrible phrase I use sometimes when I describe security teams who are very focused on reacting to the fire alarm. Where sometimes in security there's a firefighter mindset. We're very adrenaline focused. And it's fun when the alarm goes off and everyone's excited and you go fight the fire and then blah blah blah. But if you don't have the idea in mind that there are business goals here, that we need to make sure that we are protecting the business, then I think sometimes security teams can become Jira jockeys where they're really focused on, the scene gave me an alert, I validated it, I created a ticket, I assigned it, good job me. No one cares. That's an interstitial step in the process. The outcome we want is, are our systems secure? Is our data secure? Is it confidential? And that was always the promise of CTEM. If you can just, instead of worrying about all the vulnerabilities that might be exploitable, might be reachable, might affect your network, if you're just continuously threat testing your network, your systems, your edge and perimeter, that's where you get the most juicy, tangible, usable results. There's always going to be more vulnerabilities than we can fix, before the heat death of the universe. But what is the most important for my environment? That's what CTEM has always theoretically said you should get. If you're just continuously testing, not once a year, you're not going to be surprised. You have an opportunity to fix these things as close to discovery as possible. But as I say, we didn't have the technology. And the only way you could do that is really large enterprises could invest in that. But frankly, in the age of AI, and not just LLMs, but agentic AI, we really have the opportunity to have a fire and forget kind of mindset. If you said, "Hey Terry, you've got all the money and time in the world, how would you protect us?" Well, I'd say, well, I'd hire a huge red team, and they would do nothing but hammer on my systems and network and tell me where we're vulnerable and then tell us how to fix it 24/7. And that's never going to happen. But that's the promise of agentic AI. You can really say, these are the outcomes I want. You don't have to build this massive, like, if then loop of, is this port open? If not, go to the next one. You don't have to write all that out. You can really kind of tell agentic AI what are the outcomes you intend and set it loose with some guardrails, of course.
Right.
And then you're going to get much more targeted outcomes. You're going to really have your security team understanding, where are the pressure points? Is it systematic? Is it cultural because our devs tend to release things in certain patterns? That's where CTEM gives us the promise of really being able to again, if risk management is really resource management, we should put our resources to the most the worst things that can happen to us, and CTEM theoretically shows us that.
Now, how does that look like in, say, a DevSecOps pipeline, right? Are you looking Are you testing your systems as part of, let's say, the CTEM? Is it being initiated at the shift left, or how does that work in theory or in practice, actually?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, moving as far left as possible, I think your developers' IDEs are a great point these days. That we've always known that it was a high risk situation. We give developers high standing access. They have access to a lot of really juicy data. They tend to be able to do a lot on their own laptops, in their own IDEs, etc. If you could, and there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of good focus that's shifting towards the developer environment with this explosion of, vibe coding tools and things like that.
Yeah.
But sometimes those approaches are still reactive, or it's trying to prevent shadow IT. Well, we don't necessarily want people to install these certain tools. I think the ship has sailed in terms of being able to say, well, if I just have an allow list and a block list, then I'm done. When new tools are coming out every day, no one's going to be able to keep up with that, and you're not going to be able to roll that out to everyone's, policies on their EDR for every single endpoint. But if you're able to pressure test, maybe in a test environment, this is a developer workstation with certain tools involved. What could happen if this vulnerability were exploited and a lateral movement were used, and I were able to pull this data from this source? That becomes more realistic, rather than telling developers, don't install this tool, please, or we just constantly need to catch up and find where the worst attacks are coming in. As people start to use parallel library attacks in, tools where the tool itself is definitely something we want developers to use, but these particular libraries or extensions or what have you, we want to find and block those. That's again, that's sort of chasing the shadow IT puck, which has already passed us. And I think having CTEM gives us the ability to say, not what could happen, but these are real things that we were able to prove are able to happen, given the combination of access and this tool and this network access, etc.
Yeah. So when everything, your threat landscape, everything looks critical, right? How do you prioritize those, and what does your triage framework look like whenever you're trying to really get into that actionable intelligence versus just garbage, essentially?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can't say I don't know that I have the silver bullet to fix that one, but I do think, again, having the more you can automate large sets of data and get better, more actionable results from them, the more you're doing yourself a service. So using LLMs to throw, vast bulks of data in there and say, hey, show me what's important here. Show me what's relevant to this set of systems or what have you. It's really about helping yourself. So I think about it. Yeah, I guess I think about it this way. No one ever got fired for not automating. You get fired for not keeping up with the pace of reality. So you're automating for yourself. And I think if you can use AI tools, you can use agentic AI to do this 24/7 rather than relying on human hours, then you get to the point where you have context in a way that was always possible, but it took time and it took precious human resources. It's almost like you have an analyst on your shoulder that you can say, hey, I have this bunch of data. I need to find the needle in this haystack. Go take care of this for me, and come back when you have something useful, or come back when you have the 10 most useful things. That's how we can use automation to really decide, where am I spending my time in the best possible way for the business, which again helps me do my job better.
Yeah, very good. Good answer. Now, as far as I know, you customer trust is one of the things that I noticed that you really preach a lot about, right? So that's your current focus, right? So most CISOs talk about risk reduction, threat detection, but not really customer trust, right? Why is that on your list, and why do you think a lot of CISOs don't really talk about that as much?
It's interesting. I've always worked in software. Whether I was a builder or now a security professional, um, I've always been in the process of producing software, whether it's on-prem, SaaS, now AI, that is going to be purchased and used by customers. And I think it's given me the realization that what as I said before, if you start from the right side, if you start with the goal in sight, what is it our customers want from us? Do they want to send me a 500 question spreadsheet that I'm going to fill out with all these details that will hopefully match up with the answers they were looking for and hit a certain percentage that allows them to pass through the security review on their side so that they can use us as a vendor? They don't want that. I sure don't want that. And it doesn't really help anyone because often at the end of that cycle, we wind up getting on a call with them anyway and diving into some details. So I think the more we treat customer trust as the outcome, it helps guide where to spend our resources. Do I want to build a great application security program and make sure that everything's in order? Absolutely. But since I don't have all the time and money in the world, I have to focus. So as I work for companies that are startup scale ups and in their early public years that are selling to enterprise clients, I'm able to bring that mindset, having worked at larger companies, and understand when I was in that role, here's what I reviewed in order to make the go, no go decision to use this vendor. I don't want to have to do that manually. And I'm a human. It's prone to error. So the more I can understand what is the threshold? They need to be above this bar. If they're not above that bar, then we need to have a conversation or we can't use them as a vendor. How do I automate that? How do I make it part of our standard operating procedure so we understand what is the margin of error that our customers are willing to accept and not? In the same way that operationally, we know that if I take a service down that all our customer use at not 9 a.m. Pacific time, it's going to impact a lot of our customers. So I probably wouldn't do that. I'd probably do that during off hours. In the same way, for security, if I understand what our customers need, if I understand what will get us deals, what will get us to renew, and what will keep our customers happy, then I have a much stronger chance of understanding, to your earlier point, what do I focus on? Which vulnerabilities do I fix? What areas do I start with? If we are in the business of making money by selling software to other customers, then that helps me understand what do I do, and it helps me understand how can I invest in doing that once rather than having all those manual, bespoke, sort of fire drill type conversations during the sales cycle.
Yeah, yeah. It's you would assume it's fundamental stuff, right? That you're really targeting more than anything, and a lot of people don't get it. They don't really get it. So now you've advised a lot of early stage startups, right? Like Sierra, Conductor One, Profit Security, and others. When founders come to you, what do they most often get wrong about building products that actually earns customers' trust?
Oh, interesting. Since I advise a lot of security startups, I think one of it's interesting, and this actually goes back to the last thing we were talking about. When you're a security engineer, you are you learn how to be a security engineer. And as you sort of rise through the ranks and you become a senior and a staff engineer, et cetera, it changes to some extent. You're expected to, influence without authority and things like that. But then suddenly you move into a leadership position and your job completely changes. Your job is customer trust. So to that extent, I think sometimes we focus on getting the sale when we're founders of a startup. We want to get customers. We want to show this amazing technology, what it can do. And it's important to make sure that the buyer, who's maybe the CISO, gets it. They have something they can use out of it, etc. But sometimes I think when I talk to founders, they focus too heavily on the needs of the CISO, or they focus too heavily on the operational needs of my security team. And I think the perfect balance is really making sure that you're serving both of those personas. I need a way to help let's go back to CTEM. I need a way to make sure that my AppSec team or what have you, infra team, can continuously test and understand where the challenges are so they can work on the right stuff. That's incredibly important, the downward facing view. How do I do my job better? But you also need to have that upward facing view. What does the CISO get out of that? How does the CISO turn that into a risk-based conversation? How does the CISO use that information to have a conversation with the head of engineering to say, hey, we need to focus less on this and more on this? So one of the things I advise most in terms of those founders is make sure that you're serving all the personas in your customer, not just management and leadership, not just engineers. You really need to find a way to tie those things together. And by doing so, you get the incredible benefit of the fact that, again, no one cares if I build an amazing AppSec program. What they care about is the business outcomes. And the more the tool focuses on tying that together between the hardcore engineering work and the actual leadership and presentations to the board, the more successful you're going to be.
Awesome. Now you're also teaching at Harvard now, right? So software application security, life cycle threats. What's the one thing you wish most engineers understood about security before they ship code?
A lot of it comes down to practical, bare knuckle boxing experience. It's very easy to say, this is the right thing to do. And in a perfect world, we would just do that all the time. But we're always going to have resource constraints. We're always going to have competing priorities. Should we ship this new feature that is on our roadmap and we promise to customers? Or should we fix these bugs that customers are really complaining about? It's never one or the other. It's always, you've got to find a balance. So I think one of the things that I've enjoyed most about teaching at Harvard has been giving the just brutal from the trenches experiences of what looks like it will work when you look at the frameworks or regulations, or you read the stories, and what actually happens when the door is closed and you're in that tough meeting with engineering and leadership trying to understand, we only have so much, how do we distribute it? I think that's something that, again, when you're a security engineer, you don't necessarily get exposure to that. So that's one thing I always try to do with my teams, is to make sure I tell them not just here's the decision, but here's what happened, here's how we got there, here's what I felt I did well and what I didn't. And I love sharing those experiences with people who are working on their masters, usually at Harvard, in cybersecurity. They have some experience, but it's a way to really help them understand that there are so many tough decisions that you have to make in security every day. And the more you get comfortable with that sooner, the more successful you'll be.
Now, if you could give one principle or practice to a security leader trying to move fast without breaking trust, what would it be?
I think the fastest way to lose trust is trying to automate what you don't fully understand. I think there's a lot of great places to automate. Anything repetitive, something where you want a high level of consistency, something where you want to close the gap in terms of signal and response. Those are great places to automate. Yeah. Immature processes, trying to scrape together, trying to take human work and automate it, like decision making, blindly trusting output of tools. Those are areas where if you automate those too soon, you're going to very quickly, you're going to get in trouble, because something's going to go wrong. And if you don't understand it well enough, you're not going to have a fallback position.
So Terry, what's next for you? Are you building or exploring anything that has you excited?
I mean, CTEM, frankly, we've been talking about that for 10 years, and it's nice to see that actually become a reality. So that's been really exciting, working with companies like Citrix, and who are really not just doing automated pen testing, but agentic AI red teaming continuously. That's really exciting. And honestly, I'm really enjoying at the moment the fractional CISO work I'm doing for Udia. I didn't think from the outside about how complex the data security and privacy issues that legal teams deal with, and the level of, it's incredibly important work, but there's a high degree of repetition that the legal teams unfortunately just have had to throw human hours at, and they're able to now finally get the benefit of AI and trust and building secure private systems that will help them do their job faster. That has been fascinating. I'm not ready to hang up my hat. I love the operational CISO role, and I have started looking around for my next full-time CISO role. As I said, I love working in software, and I love the fact that the world is converging. Um, you can't you can't be a software engineer and not worry about security anymore. You can't be a security engineer and not understand how the sausage is made, or how the code is written, or how the Terraform is constructed. And I love the fact that that's all converging. So I'm always excited to work with companies that are at that incredible inflection point or transition point where they're at A, they know they need to get to B, and very quickly. I love helping companies, whether it's advising or fractional CISO work or what have you. I love working with companies that have a good understanding of where they need to get to, and they just need help kind of getting up on the horse and doing it at scale and at speed faster than anyone thought humanly possible. That's always what excites me.
Awesome. Now, where can people follow your work or connect with you?
The best place to find me is on LinkedIn. You can just find me at /Terry O'Daniel. And I also have a website, terryo'daniel.com. I do a fair bit of posting on LinkedIn these days, where I share lovely podcasts like this, as well as just my thoughts and some companies that I'm working with that are doing some interesting things. And so feel free to follow me on LinkedIn and reach out if you have something to share. And also, if you're in the security community, I pretty frequently, I'm quite a member of quite a few CISO organizations, and I tend to speak at the larger conferences like RSA or Black Hat. I'd love to meet you there if you have some questions. And more importantly, I'd say, if you're not in security, I love bridging the gap between engineering and security, whether it's infra-eng or what have you. If you're an engineer who has had bad or good experiences with security, reach out, tell me what they were, and I think we can learn from each other.
Thanks. Thank you, Terry. Thanks for being on the show. This has been a real conversation. No fluff, just how the work actually gets done. And to everybody listening, if this conversation helped you think differently about CTEM, vulnerability management, or building customer trust through security, share it with someone who builds. Follow the show, leave a review, and we'll see you next time on Automate or Like Trying, where the future is being built in real time. Thank you.